The United States is set to designate Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a foreign terrorist organization. To talk more about this and the other top stories from around the globe is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Iranian lawmakers are warning of retaliation if the U.S. designates the Revolutionary Guards as terrorists.
You know, of course they're going to make that kind of threat because they make that threat anytime there's any sort of aggression by the United States against them or by the West. They will flex their muscles and pretend that they have still some leverage in this game, which they don't. As we know, based on the economic penalties, the sanctions have really made a dent in Iran's economy, both on the level of the mullahs and the oil sector, which is most important, and banking. I guess when I saw this, I was thinking, what took them so long, right? Regardless, I think we could all agree, perhaps, that the Revolutionary Guard is the most horrific arm of the Iranian militia, which is responsible for global suicide bombings, for supporting terrorism around the globe in places like Syria and Yemen and Lebanon and Gaza, and the list goes on and on. Of course, propping up the Venezuelan President Maduro right now. So, what took them so long is the first question. But secondly, to see the opponents of the Trump administration now speak against Trump internally here in the United States to oppose any sort of aggression or any sort of diplomatic measures that are taken against the Iranian regime to curb them. And when in reality, this is exactly what needs to be done to curb the heinous actions of a very rogue regime that, again, has turned its back on its own people and instead chooses to support terrorism globally.
Lisa, flooding has hit many areas of the world, including Iran. That country will not be receiving any financial aid from abroad due to U.S. sanctions. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so this is the unfortunate part of the sanctions, is that it does also affect Main Street. The Iranian people will definitely be affected, and not only because of the direct the direct damage of sanctions, but because of the pressure put on them by their regime, because of the excuse or that they could hide behind the fact that there are sanctions. So, for example, the price of basic goods like bread and dairy products and eggs, meat, all being inflated, and worst of all, pharmaceutical supplies when people need cancer medications and very, very life-threatening diseases that need to be treated. Those medications being, the prices being inflated to a place where people can no longer afford them. So, of course, now that there's a flood, we had this issue before where there was an earthquake, and it was said that the Iranian regime was not allowing the funds that were being raised outside the country to reach the people. So in this case, we're not sure if this is something that's imposed by the regime that's not allowing the money to reach the people, or in fact, if this is actually because of the sanctions on the banking system. But where there's a will, there's a way. There are so many social media, efforts right now to raise money for the people of Iran, the expat Iranians and others around the world. So many human rights organizations that are raising money that would love to get the supplies, the aid, the money to the people of Iran. And we hope that it gets there, that they don't take a page out of the Maduro handbook and stop supplies from getting to their constituents.
That's so true, isn't it? I mean, a lot of it has to do with the corruption, isn't it? Like you said, with Venezuela, a lot of the food trucks, a lot of the money, will it actually make its way to the people instead of just the government?
Exactly right. So, this is not the time to flex your muscles and use that anti-West propaganda to say that they're the ones who are responsible for that aid being blocked, but in fact, to get that aid to the people who it belongs to.
Lisa, the U.S. military is pulling out of the Libyan capital as rival militias are battling it out. The European Union says the fighting in Libya could trigger another refugee crisis amid fears of a civil war.
Right, of course. There has been no stability in Libya in a very long time. We haven't heard about it or haven't been focused on it because there haven't been any, new headlines. But it's business as usual. It's a tribal society. It is broken up. And now these different militias or these pockets that have grown, so we give them time, we look away, and these insurgencies grow. And now they're fighting against each other. And when you have Western assets in the middle of all of this, with really no skin in the game at this point, which way do we want it to go? I think for a while, the foreign policy was to get Gaddafi out, and we did. Then you had 4 Americans, very innocent, American employees who were killed, and there was no answers for that. And why were they there? What purpose did we have there? And again, we weren't doing any good. So now the message from the State Department is we encourage you to use diplomatic measures. We encourage you to talk it out. We encourage you to create that stability and leave it up to them. Nation building is ultimately up to the people.
Lisa, we've seen energy prices going up as oil has hit a 5-month high. A big part of that is thanks to Libyan clashes leading to supply concerns.
Yes, so the supply-demand issue here is very clear. Where you have all the turmoil around the globe, it boosts the demand from the West, and it decreases our reliance on oil elsewhere in the world, which is not a bad thing at all. Hal, you and I talked about this off air. I think that both for Canada, for the United States, this is a wonderful thing. We should focus on that independence and really try to look away from the Middle East for that.
Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen has resigned after a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. What has the reaction been like at the White House?
A lot of turmoil today at the White House. We're seeing a lot of reshuffling in these departments of Homeland Security and in Secret Service. There will be some reshuffling, and I think what ends up happening is that the president has a very difficult time trusting those around him. So when there is this discord of opinion, people are removed, they're shuffled around, and we have new leaders. I actually had the opportunity to hear President Trump and Mike Pence speak over the weekend in Las Vegas at a conference. The focus right now is national security. It's the border. And whoever's not on board with that, I think we'll have to take a step back, because it's very important that this is a unified message from the White House. And I think for Donald Trump, it's important to have those who are around him agree on that.
And what's the latest with the wall? Any more talk of that?
He did talk about that. He talked about, and the governor from Texas was there as well. And he talked about how in their state, how important this wall is, and that they are doing a big piece of that there, because for them, it's just a no-brainer. People in Texas want to be protected. They want to feel safe. And they talked a lot about those who are coming through, and that they do not all have the best of intentions. You see people who are applying for asylum that do not look like they should be applying for asylum. So this is going to take a very intense and nuanced vetting process. And until this country as a whole is on the same page about keeping its citizens safe, both those who are here and those who want to come abroad, across the border, those families need to feel safe as well. It's really safety across the board. It's an issue here because it's become more of a political talking point than a matter of logistics and strategy, and that's the sad part.
You know, here in Canada, it was a big issue as well, with a lot of refugees crossing the border from upstate New York into Quebec. And some of them, a lot of people are posing as refugees, but, were they vetted properly to begin with? And are some of these jihadists as well? So you have to really be careful, don't you?
Absolutely. And I think, someone once said, what are you going to call the DMV in Raqqa and say, do I have the right name and address and social security number? That's not going to happen. So even a very intense vetting process will not be 100% sure of anything right now. And I think, that vulnerability exists. And, for Canada, for the United States, this is not a risk that we want to take, and put our own citizens at risk right now.
Israel's election is coming up. Arab-Israeli candidates have launched a last-ditch effort against Benjamin Netanyahu. Tell me more about that.
Sure. So Benjamin Netanyahu has a lot of enemies. Of course, he has a lot of supporters as well, but he is considered a very hawkish right-wing leader. In the realm of national security, speaking of which, Bibi Netanyahu is considered number one. So Tuesday is election day. I think there's a very complex process by which the Israeli election system works. Even if you get the number of votes, you have to build a coalition. So you might not even become president, even if you win the most number of votes. So we'll see what happens. But there's a very similar, I would like to say, kind of issue, or I would say a parallel issue to what happened here in the United States. I think a lot of people go to the polls and they think to themselves, well, would I want to go to lunch with Bibi? Maybe not. He's a little bit brash, but does he keep our country safe? Yes, and I will vote for him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out on top again, despite the efforts by different Arab coalitions and those on the left. It's mostly the media in Israel. That's why we're seeing so many headlines against Bibi. But when you go to the country and you speak to people, there are a lot of people who are happy with the way that he's kept the country safer than it would be under anyone else. It's not a safe neighborhood, with regards to all these Arab neighbors that want to take Israel off the map. So for somebody like Bibi to be able to stand strong and do whatever the best that he can, I do think that he's won a lot of votes that way.
Across the pond from North America, Theresa May is gambling it all in a last-ditch bid to deliver Brexit. The UK is holding out hope for a Brexit compromise by the Friday deadline, Lisa.
Yes, we are getting very close and down to the wire, and it seems like Theresa May is putting out an olive branch, hoping to get others on board with whatever plan that she can with the Labour Party. And if she can't, it looks like they may withdraw without a deal, which I've spoken to many people who think that is not the worst case. The worst case would be to stay with the EU. Again, that's an opinion that I've heard many times over by many, many experts. I'm sure there's others who believe otherwise. But economically speaking, many, many believe that withdrawing, even without a deal, would be beneficial to both the West and the UK. And Theresa May is going, this is her last chance, because I think it speaks not only to what the legacy of Brexit will be, past, present, future, but it will be what her future will be in politics. And this is probably her last term, and so she wants to go out with this crown jewel.
China is not buying a lot of Canadian canola right now. The embargo continues. But the Asian nation, Lisa, is purchasing a lot of gold. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, pretty smart, right? Every time you turn around, it's something that we can learn from China. They are fortifying their economic standing in the world, in the global economy. I think when they do see that the United States and others are trying to curb China's economic behavior with what Donald Trump claims, and I'll loosely quote him when he says they're getting away with murder with regards to how they conduct themselves with regards to the economy and how they conduct global trade. I think that what is going on, what Donald Trump said over the weekend is that he has a very good deal that people will probably be happy with if it happens. And he did reiterate that a couple times. So we'll see if the deal will go through. And if it does, it looks like the United States will have the upper hand. We're hoping, because if the tariffs have gone on for this long and the economic pressures have gone on for this long, we're hoping that it's something that benefits the West in the long run. So again, it makes sense that China's doing everything they can to fortify themselves at this point.
Lisa, we only have a few short moments left here, but closer to home and right beside us in British Columbia, a lot of major forest fires are breaking out once again. It's only April right now. What about in Southern California where you are?
Nothing yet, but we've had a very, very cold, and I say that tongue in cheek, but it's true, winter, probably the coldest February, I believe, and I'm not sure about March on record. We're having a beautiful day today. It's actually very warm, but the temperatures are gonna go right back down again. So spring's been late here in Southern California, which, as you said, because of the fires and because of the history of fires and the people that were devastated by the previous fires have a chance to recuperate and get a break from the fires in this part of the country.
Lisa, keep warm, and thanks again for joining us.
Thanks.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, be safe, and have a great night.